terkait dengan ketidakpastian ekonomi global dan juga dinamika kebijakan domestik hingga persaingan investasi di kawasan Asia Tenggara yang kini menjadi tantangan tersendiri bagi Indonesia dalam menjaga kepercayaan investor. Dan di tengah berbagai upaya pemerintah memperkuat fundamental ekonomi, mampukah Indonesia kembali menjadi tujuan utama investasi global? Dan untuk membahasnya telah bergabung bersama kami melalui sambungan virtual Denise Cheok, Head of Southeast Asia Economics Moody's Analytics. Good morning, Ms. Denise.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you with us on CNN Indonesia Business this morning. So, Denise, Indonesia is still seen as one of the region's most important growth stories. Yet, global investors are becoming more selective and are paying closer attention to policy executions. So, let me start with the big pictures from Moody's Analytics perspective. How would you assess Indonesia's macroeconomic positions today?
Yeah, I think for Indonesia, growth we think will largely be supported by domestic demand still. We saw that in Q1, right? But I think a lot of that growth, that 5.6% in Q1 was really pushed up by government spending. So we've seen recent retail sales numbers dipping, and I think this is really indicative of the extent of the external headwinds that Indonesia is facing. I think the challenge to the macroeconomic picture really is to balance the current volatile situation and also sort of planning for longer term growth ahead in the next couple of years.
Right. So if that's where Indonesia stands today, what do you think is still holding investor back until now?
Yeah, I think there was previously in the first half of the year, there was a lot of concern, right, over the fiscal debt, over issues of transparency in stock market. But I think what investors are really looking for is sort of that coherence in government policy, right? Whether they want to achieve a certain growth target, whether they want to achieve self-sufficiency. Obviously it's not straightforward, but I think just signaling that the government policy is moving towards a certain direction is something that would help the investors.
Right. So what does Indonesia need to prove over, let's say, the next 12 months to rebuild investors' confidence?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, right? And I think for Indonesia, given the external volatility, I think stability policy, that is something that they can prove as well. In terms of job growth, I think we are also looking for sort of higher value add jobs, right? I think the unemployment numbers are currently looking very good right now, but underneath that, there's a lot of concern over youth unemployment and whether, these jobs are really in the formal sector. So I think that's something that, that can be looked at.
Yeah, maybe beside the unemployment, fiscal policy also become one of the, key tasks, for our governments. So will our government spending while pledging to keep the budget under control? So what will the investors be watching, most closely to Indonesia?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of concern over breaching that 3% debt limit, right? But I think for us, the debt itself is not so much the issue. It's what you're spending that money on. Are you spending it on long-term infrastructure? Are you addressing these long-term issues? So, that number alone is not enough, right? It's really what's beneath that number. And whether, again, does it lean to your reputation? Is it anchoring investor confidence in the economy?
Though we could say that investors always have alternatives on that, right? So how does Indonesia compare with Vietnam, Malaysia, and maybe the Philippines as our neighbors countries as destinations for long-term investment, Denise?
Yeah, so I think for Indonesia, a lot of the investment now a lot of the FDI is going to mining, into metals, into the natural resources. For Vietnam, Malaysia especially, they're very hitched on the AI train, right? So they have a lot more investment into manufacturing, into tech, into data centers. Obviously, Indonesia has some of that, but it's not as big as sort of the regional peers.
Right. So based on that, what do you think our strength, to compare with, AI and technology in Malaysia, in Singapore, and maybe mining with finance? So what do you think our strength?
Yeah, so for Indonesia, it's a huge domestic market, right? Indonesia is a G20. There's so much natural resources, nickel, coal, palm oil. And I think the strength really now is that it's not as import dependent as, say, Singapore, as, say, your South Korea, your Japan. And so I think that's all the more important now, right? Because we're seeing oil shocks, we're seeing food shocks, we're seeing tariffs in external environment. So, having that domestic stability in
Okay.
terms of resources, in terms of markets. I think that really is helping Indonesia.
Right, we have the sources, we have the market. So why do you think that? So why is it starting to fall behind? So that's gonna be the big questions, right? We have all the sources, we have the big market here in Indonesia. Why we keep losing?
I think the strength also is in the kind of weakness, right? So let's say for Singapore, it's so small, and so the policy is very easy because the country is so small. But for Indonesia, it's so large. It's an archipelago. There's so many islands, and it's very hard to dictate policy from Jakarta alone, right? So the potential really is there, but I think it's difficult as well as to maintain policy coherence across the entire country, across all the islands as well.
Right. So despite these challenges, like market sentiments has improved recently. I would believe that. And do you think that's because Indonesia's fundamentals are getting stronger, or simply because assets have become more attractive for the investors?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, right? So externally, you see the conflict in the Middle East has eased somewhat. You see oil prices have come off their peak at about $80 per barrel now. So they have eased since the start of the year. There's also been some move towards market reform, right? So raising the free float requirement, retaining its investor grade status. So these things have been helping in the second half of the year. But these are more incremental improvements rather than large shifts in fundamental. They do help, obviously, but I think, for a genuine shift, we need to see sort of stronger response to the changes.
To the changes, do you think we can adapt with those changes?
I mean, again, like it has the potential, right? I think Indonesia has a lot of potential, especially in Southeast Asia, given sort of what's happening between the US and China. So it's whether they can realize, they can harness all these things to realize that potential.
Right, right. And looking ahead, what will be the biggest factor in determining whether Indonesia can attract more high-quality investment?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think one of the factors now is really external, right? So that's something that's out of the control of a lot of countries. So, whether trade policy, whether investor policy is supportive of investments coming to EMs, right? Like Indonesia. But I think, again, given that natural resource, Indonesia can concentrate on that and think about how to move that into more high-end manufacturing rather than sort of staying on to lower-end natural resource extraction.
Do you think that Indonesia, like until now, we are being struggled, like how to manage our natural resources and how to build the infrastructure for that? Do you think that we have that kind of, like a lack of that?
I don't think it's a lack, right? Again, like the country is so big, there's so many things going on, and it's not helping, right? That everything else is so messy. There's so many things happening. So you need to balance the oil shock, for instance. So you do need to have some kind of subsidy in place to protect households. But at the same time, you also need to think long term, right? How are you going to address your long term growth? How are you going to help the shrinking middle class grow into to support their spending? So I think that there is something there, obviously, but just it's how you navigate the current volatile environment.
Right, right. And we have a very big market here in Indonesia, like you said earlier. Then how can we really, achieve that, to increase our, income and attractions for the investors in Indonesia? Do you have certain, tips for us, how to get more big investors to Indonesia?
Again, I think a lot of it is just stability, right? And also, if you want to leverage your middle class. If you want to leverage your middle class, your domestic spending, if that's really the base, right? You want to get the households to spend. I think you need to give households the security in terms of whether it's social security or whether it's promising them that there are jobs for them, good jobs for them to do, not just your informal sector, but just proper jobs, and that will encourage them to spend as well. So I guess part of it is not just attracting investor, but also encouraging that large domestic base to spend.
Yeah, we really need to encourage, how to make, proper job, not just the informal ones. So finally, if you could recommend 3 priorities to policymakers, what reforms will be the biggest differences to Indonesia's long-term growth and investment appeal? Denise.
Okay, so I'll try my best because I'm not a policymaker and it's very difficult, right? I think for a country like Indonesia. So, but I think again, a lot of it is just thinking about where you want to be in a few years' time, right? And how to achieve that in a coherent manner. Because I think
Right.
currently the issues investors are having is that a lot of the policies are not fitting into the long-term goals, right? If you want to achieve, let's say, 8% growth, how are you going to get to 8%, right? And how is your export policy? How is your, free meals program? How does this add to the 8%? That is not very clear. So I think it needs to be clear on how, individual threads of policies helping to make bring you to that 8%, for instance, or whether you want
Yes.
self-sufficiency, you don't want to rely on imports. How is all your export policies helping you to achieve that? So I think just that coherency to help investors understand
Yeah.
how you're reaching there would help a lot.
Yeah, we have a very big target, 8%, and well, finger crossed, hopefully we can make it. Yeah, achieve the target. Well, Denise, thank you so much for your insight for CNN Indonesia Business this morning. Best of luck for you and good day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you, Dennis.